Have you ever wondered, in the typical histories of the world, Cold War, World War I, World War II, Civil Wars, all that jazz, if there was more to the stories than we've been taught, than we've been told? Are you curious to hear about how life has changed so much in 1,000, 500, 300, 200 years? Well, you get a nice chance to do so with this new series I am starting on the channel today, Unique History. I have done a few of these episodes as part of the podcast recently, and I figured I have enjoyed going through the research and reading these articles and reacting to them, and I figured what a great way to have another series, another video of the week. And so this is where we begin, looking at some unique side stories to some of these historical events that are quite unique, bewildering, shocking, and are just plain cool in general. Today's story in today's episode will actually be about a famous prince and his strange dog that most people refer to as the devil dog. That's right, in today's Unique History episode, the premiere of this series, we're going to be looking at the story titled The Prince and His Devil Dog. It's an interesting story. I've looked through it a little bit, and the whole idea of witchcraft is pretty wild to me and how it was perceived in the 1600s, so we get a look into that with this particular prince and the dog. So let's begin with the article itself, and that's how the series is going to go, by the way. I will find interesting articles, blog posts, stories, articles. I have a few magazines that I might be picking up at my work that have some cool histories in it, and I'll be reading them out loud, sharing them with you, and reacting as we dive in a little bit more. So without further ado, let's look into The Prince and the Devil Dog. Okay. Among the minor celebrities of the English Civil War, few retain the contemporary cachet of Prince Rupert's dog, Boy. Clarification there, the dog is named Boy, not Prince Rupert. There you go. So he has a dog named Boy. Characterized by the polemicist of the 1640s as a dog witch who was in the league with the devil, Boy was reintroduced to the world by the Victorian journalist Elliot Warburton in his Memoirs of Prince Rupert and the Cavaliers in 1849, and from that day to this, his reputation has steadily continued to grow. That's right, guys, a single dog and its reputation has now grown and grown over the centuries, literally centuries. I'm intrigued as to why this reputation has preceded him. Let us begin. Having been checked in dozens of scholarly books and articles, including as a supporting character in at least 3 historical novels and featured in a brace of films, Boy has recently enjoyed the ultimate accolade of being unleashed upon the nation's classrooms. In the latest edition of The Slimy Stewards, one of Terry Deary's best-selling horrible history series, readers are provided with a bite-sized account of Boy's life, which informs them that the Roundheads were afraid of the dog's devilish powers. Next, they are encouraged to ascertain whether their teacher is a historical brainbox or a historical bonehead by asking him or her whether or not it is true that the Cavalier General, Prince Rupert, taught his dog to cock its leg every time someone said the name of the Roundhound leader, John Pine. The youthful inquisitors are subsequently assured that this statement is indeed correct, and that Boy also jumped happily in the air when Rupert said King Charles. There's a lot of context there. Let's break it down a little bit. When they said readers are encouraged to ascertain whether their teacher is a historical brainbox or historical bonehead, keep that in mind. That's a pretty good way to set this series up for myself. Am I a historical brainbox or am I a historical bonehead? Let me know in the comments below. This journey will take us into both categories, I'm sure. So there's that little funny little side there. Now, it looks like here, so Prince Rupert had this dog. That's kind of what we've been told here a little bit, and they believe that Prince Rupert taught his dog to cock its legs. So you know how dogs, when you take them for a walk, they lift their legs to, urinate, to pee, mark their territory, all that kind of stuff. Apparently, Prince Rupert taught his dog, Boy, to do that whenever he hears the word or the name John Pym, the leader of the opposition in the Civil War. Then, he also taught Boy, the dog, to jump very happily in the air and celebrate whenever Rupert said King Charles, to show that loyalty to the king. Interesting. So far that just sounds like a boy and his dog, and teaching his dog little tricks. We know that dogs have been trained over the years to do amazing things. We've got rescue dogs, we've got police dogs, we have dogs that are just naturally trained to deal with disasters. There's dogs out there that help with anxiety and things like that. Dogs are remarkable beings. So far I don't understand the witchcraft of these two actions. It seems very plausible that a dog can learn these tricks. But this is only the beginning of the article. I'm sure there's more to this than we can imagine with this little introduction so far. Gary's words, though clearly intended to amuse and entertain, faithfully reflect the way in which Boy has been represented in many popular histories of the English Civil War. Yet, the authors of those histories have been misled, for the view of Boy, which Gary's words epitomize, is simply the 21st century perpetuation of a 17th century hoax. So Gary, this guy who wrote the article a couple hundred years later, to kind of keep this reputation growing for this dog, basically has epitomized them, put this dog on a pedestal, despite it being a 17th century hoax. It wasn't exactly real. But I'm curious now. We have this reputation. We have a pretty good premise set up. I want to know more. Why did the people of England in the Civil War view this dog as a devil? I'm very curious. As with every good article, it's been written really, really well. It sparked your curiosity. It set up this little timeline that we're going to go through, and now it's time to go through this said timeline. The strange story of Prince Rupert's dog began in 1638, when Rupert of the Rhine, the youthful nephew of Charles I of England, was captured at the Battle of Lotho in Germany by Austrian Catholic forces. Dang. That's unfortunate to be captured by Catholic forces nonetheless. Interesting. Some of the Austrian soldiers claimed that they had been unable to kill or wound the prince, despite having fired at him twice at point-blank range. And, as a result, the rumor began to spread that Rupert was invulnerable to bullets, or shot-free. The belief that it was possible to render oneself bulletproof through occult means was widespread in the German lands at this time, and Rupert was by no means the only contemporary to whom such powers were attributed. Okay, taking a pause there. Interesting. So, he's been captured, and the Austrians obviously wanted to harm him, potentially kill him, it sounds like, but were unable to do so. They were shocked. They tried to shoot him, tried to capture him, kill or wound him, and none of the blows landed. None of the hits landed. So when you're confronted with something quite strange like that, there's so many things that people would say about that. Maybe it's in God's hands. Maybe God sees something in Rupert and wanted to keep him alive a little longer. Others would say it's a miracle, or that he is just really lucky, maybe. However, this is again in the 1600s. Some of these reasons probably did not exist for Rupert. So instead, the Austrians, and in the Germanic lands, of course, they think that he is doing occult means. practicing witchcraft, in other words, to protect himself in order to not be killed. So here is the rumors. So this is where we begin this journey of witchcraft and conspiracy, potentially. We'll see. So having been carried into Austria by his captors, Rupert was imprisoned at Linz Castle, where he languished for some time. Hoping to lift the Prince of Spirits, the Earl of Arundel, an old family friend, now sent Rupert a dog to keep him company. Weird. Earl of Arundel. I wonder where that is. If that's in Austria, because that means... So if this is in Austria, family friend probably means that, you know, with him being a prince and part of the royal lineage and nephew to King Charles I, all that will be a connection. And so, feeling bad for Rupert, he gave him a gift, even though he was a captured prisoner. It's quite an interesting thing if you think about it. Most prisoners would not be given a gift. They would be given an opportunity to write letters, potentially, you know, as correspondence, and explain what's happening, or maybe for a ransom, or whatever the terms of the capture is. But to send a dog, and the captors in Austria allowing him to keep the dog, it's quite bizarre. A unique kind of situation. What did I say, guys? Unique history? This is a pretty unique situation if you think about all the stories that you hear of people getting captured and imprisoned. Very interesting. But now we get to look into the dog itself. The dog has been given to Rupert, and now we get to learn about the dog. This next section of the article is called A Rare Breed. Virtually nothing is known for certain about this animal, but it appears to have been a hunting poodle of a rare breed. Aha, so it's a hunting poodle. See, it's funny. In contemporary modern world, you think of poodle, and you think of the very well-groomed, beautiful, tall dogs that you see in dog shows, like the beautiful curly-haired poodles. However, in the 1600s, I guess, there were hunting poodles. I mean, dogs are really good at perceiving and have really great senses, so this doesn't really surprise me. But at the same time it does, because my idea of a poodle isn't a hunting poodle, it's a showmanship poodle. Very neat, but it's of a rare breed. Interesting. When Rupert was finally released from Linz Castle in 1641, he presumably took his new companion with him, but the dog does not resurface in the historical record until more than a year later, by which time the prince himself was embroiled in the English Civil War. Weird. So we knew he had this dog, and there's nothing in the historical records or accounts or letters, correspondence, anything about this dog until the Civil War. So there's a year, a little bit over a year, a gap, where Rupert could have done anything with his dog. Anything. So that doesn't help with the rumor mill, maybe, about this dog being a devil, or Rupert training this dog in devilish ways. That would not help his case in this situation. The English Civil War, so it would have been 1642 is when the Civil War started, 1642, 1643. So yeah, 1641, a year later. There you go, there's the context. Look at me remembering my history. Anyway, let's keep going here. There's going to be some more context now for this English Civil War. It looks a little bit of a history brief, so let's get into it. During the early 1640s, Charles I and his opponents in Parliament had become locked in an increasingly bitter political struggle. Having tried and failed to arrest his chief critics, Charles eventually abandoned his capital in January 1642 and summoned his loyal subjects to assist him against the rebels at Westminster. Rupert was very swift to answer his uncle's call, and in August he was appointed as general of the Royalist Horse. Okay, there you go. So, obviously in England, there's the monarch and the parliament, so you have your monarch, aristocracy and government at this time, and then there's the parliamentarians, those that are actually physically writing down the laws, making decisions based on the king's wishes, that kind of thing. It looks like there was quite a bit of sort of a struggle between the two sides, what the king would like versus what the parliamentarians would had. He tried to arrest those that were against him, because again, that's treason, right? Back in the day, that would be treason. You were unloyal to your king. That's punishable by death in most cases, but that didn't work. This led to this war, and now he wanted to get rid of these rebels and the parliamentarians. So now you got the royalists on one side and the parliamentarians on the other side, and boom, civil war. And Rupert was loyal to his uncle, came in from England, came back from Germany, went to England, and aided in this conflict. There's some good context there. Perfect. So 2 months later, so this was again in August, so 2 months later would be October of 1642, Rupert and his troopers smashed the parliamentarian cavalry regiments which were ranged against them at the Battle of Edgehill. A complete parliamentarian defeat was narrowly averted, but as the royalist army advanced upon London, so Roundhead polemicists grew ever more shrill in their denunciations of the outlandish prince who marched at the head of the cavalier forces. So pausing there to kind of translate this little section here, looks like the royalists anticipated this kind of conflict at Edgehill, and so the parliamentarians had this army set up on Edgehill. It's a part kind of near London a little bit, and were ready to face the royalists. They had a conflict, and the parliamentarians basically almost lost. They didn't quite lose, they must have retreated or some sort of alternative action instead of continuing to fight and be defeated. However, throughout this conflict and observing the prince, who's leading this charge, basically leading this part of the war, it looks like the Roundhead, so the parliamentarians, noticed odd things about the prince, this outlandish prince, and thus began rumors of this prince. There you go. I don't want to translate that part because some of it's quite worded in a way that's a little iffy to understand. So I hope that clarifies that for you guys, the listener. Let's keep going here and understand what they mean by outlandish prince. So, during early 1642, hundreds of printed pamphlets had been pouring off the capital's presses every month, many of them intended to denigrate the king's friends and exalt his foes. So again, this is propaganda. In any war or conflict, there's propaganda. You've got the propaganda that promotes your side of the conflict and shows that you are better than the others. Then you've got the propaganda that slanders the other side. What they said here, there's a lot of pamphlets and news articles and brochures basically being printed to denigrate the king's friends and his forces. So they're finding any kind of story or rumor they can latch onto and use it against the royalists. So this is kind of going to lead to Rupert a little bit, I think. That's what I'm predicting here. Let's see. Now, several pamphlets appeared that sought to exploit the occult rumors which had previously circulated around Rupert by suggesting that the king's nephew was a shot-proof shapeshifter armed with devilish powers. Whoa, let's break that down a little bit. Think about this. We don't have any really record of the dog at this point. And now they've heard about the rumors. In Austria, probably it's spread like wildfire, I'm sure, that he is bulletproof. He can't be shot, he can't be injured, he can't be wounded. And now they have this idea of a shapeshifter coming out of nowhere. It seems a little bit out of nowhere, a little out of place, but they ran with it. And they started to print all these pamphlets against Rupert. And him being this satanic, devilish freak of nature, basically. And he's the one leading the royalists, which probably means he has a horrible image. And that's probably the whole purpose that they're doing that, is to ruin his image as a general. An interesting way to do it, but again, it's that time period. Witchcraft and, hunting witches down and killing them or trying them was totally part of this era as well. So it makes sense for the context of the time period, but out of context of the time period, in today's world, it seems crazy. It absolutely does. I get it. But apparently, since I'm not even halfway done through the article yet, there is more. Let's see how much more crazier our story can get. So these claims, again, made in an age, it should be remembered, when most people still believed implicitly in the reality of witchcraft, were clearly intended to convince the pamphlet's more impressionable readers that the royalist cause was satanic. It's impossible to say just how far such allegations were credited among the ordinary people of England. That's a really interesting point to make. These pamphlets were printed, they were making it look like he was awful, he was practicing witchcraft, he should be hunted, he should be tried, all these things, just trying to ruin his image as a general of the royalist army. However, it wasn't clear what people thought about these pamphlets. So these allegations and the things being printed, there's no real record of anyone, either all of England believing it or all of England denying it, or there being mixed reactions. There's no real record of that. So it's, again, they were printed willy-nilly and they were hoping it would land on the population of England. However, it's unknown if that actually worked. Fair enough. Let's continue. However, following the king's failure to take London and his retreat to Oxford in November, the royalist polemicist John Cleveland hit back with a satirical poem that mocked the Roundheads for their supposed that's a really difficult word to say, credulousness? Basically supposed credit, like their reputation themselves. So this guy, John Cleveland, part of the royalist army, a polemicist. I'm not sure what polemicist is. It's either like a political figure or maybe just actually someone in the army or fighting. So he fought back in a very creative way. So he could have done pamphlets as well, and it would have been like a printing press war basically in England. But instead he published a poem that mocked the parliamentarians and for their allegations against the prince. So let's see how he does this, because satire can be very sarcastic, but if it's sarcastic too much, it could be read the wrong way. That's the one thing to be cautioned of when using sarcasm. Not everyone is going to understand your sarcasm or your humor or your dark sense of humor. So if it's too much, then people might be like, dang, are you okay? Like, maybe some of this is actually true and it's not a lie. So it could have opposite effects, basically, to what was intended for a piece of satire. So I'm curious if this actually worked, basically. So, Cleveland claimed that the belief that Rupert possessed magical powers was universal among the Roundheads, and also declared that they were convinced that the prince's dog was his devil or familiar spirit. That is to say, a demon in the shape of an animal, which provided him with occult assistance. Okay. So he basically was, I think his form of satire was saying, look at what these guys believe in. Isn't it crazy? I guess they also didn't know that the dog that he has is also devilish and has witchcraft within them too. Scandalous. And I'm using that kind of form of sarcasm a little bit in his poem. I don't think that would work though in this case, because the parliamentarians are absolutely terrified of witchcraft and devils and Satan and that kind of practice back then. They might actually be more afraid or would want to actually believe that. So I'm curious to see if this satire came off as sarcastic and like, ha ha ha, that's hilarious, or more of a, oh no, now the dog's a devil too? We'll see here, I suppose. So it was during the course of this poem that Cleveland suggested, with his tongue firmly in his cheek. Okay, so he's being cheeky. When you hear that phrase, tongue in cheek, it means he's definitely lying a little bit, or playing on the truth, or basically being exaggerated in a case. So he said here, I suggested that if anyone spoke the name of Charles, the dog at once comes aloft for him. Okay, so back to earlier in the article, the dog would get really excited and jump in the air happily for hearing the name Charles. But holds up his malignant leg at Pym, an off-the-cuff jest which would later come to be regarded by many historians as representative of what the parliamentarians had truly believed. I was right. Oh no. So the satire did not land on the parliamentarians in the intended way that Cleveland wanted. He was being outlandish, he exaggerated all these claims about the dog and Prince Rupert. However, it led for the parliamentarians to truly believe that the dog would do this, that the dog did this, and it's now being an occult assistant to Rupert, and now they're both witchcrafts and devils themselves. Oh no. Oof, that's the one thing about satire, guys, that if it's done really, really well, you're kind of like, hee hee hee, nice one. But if it's done too well or not well enough, then it's like, oh no, is that actually true? And boom, rumors spread and panic ensues, and I'm sure that's what happened for the parliamentarians at this point. Oh no. So that's the parliamentarian reaction, I guess, opposed to this. Oof, that's a rough one there, buddy. Your satire was too good, Cleveland. Well done. But also, yikes. Cleveland's satire clearly delighted his fellow royalists, though, suggesting, as it did, that the Roundheads were gullible fools. There you go. That was the intended purpose of the satire, is to make them look like fools. And for the royalists, the people that followed the king, they understood it. They got it. They understood what he was trying to do. So, at least one side of this conflict understood Cleveland's intent by the satire. Good job, Cleveland. So, by January 1643, the king's supporters were reported to be drinking healths to Prince Rupert's dog. Oh my god. That would be the British, wouldn't it? Basically, sitting around at a pub, chatting, joking around, and at the end of the night, instead of going, cheers to good health to the king, good health to the queen, good health to our prince, our lord, our royal family, or to whoever, they would say, cheers to boy, Prince Rupert's dog, instead. Oh, that's very funny, actually. Yikes. So the satire created a little bit of a joke and a little bit of a drinking game, potentially, amongst the English royalists of this time period in 1643. Well, interesting. So much mirth did the poem provoke that soon afterwards an anonymous royalist writer sought to capitalize on it by composing an entire pamphlet about the animal itself. Of course, a crazy, outlandish poem is released. These royalists are like, oh, that's so funny. Let's drink to the dog, yay. And then, surely enough, a royalist writer comes out and is like, I could use this. Absolutely. I'm going to run with it further. I'm going to take this further than it already has. Which the parliamentarians would not enjoy. Let's make that very clear. Yikes. Here we go. Entitled Observations Upon Prince Rupert's White Dog Called a Boy, this artful tract took the form of a letter. So instead of a brochure or an article, it's a letter, a reproduction. It was clearly implied of an original missive which had supposedly been sent from Oxford to London by a parliamentarian spy named T.B. So this letter is sent from this parliamentarian spy, either real or made up. Who really knows at this point? But this letter basically seems like it became pretty famous, or became famous basically. Written in a parody of the Puritans' canting style, the letter solemnly listed the magical powers that Boy was held to possess, and claimed that the prince's companion was not, in fact, a real dog, but was rather a handsome white woman in the shape of a dog, with whom Rupert enjoyed frequent sexual encounters. Okay. We've got satire upon satire upon satire in this case here. We started with Cleveland. He made this outlandish jokes and claims that this dog would do like these little things when he hears the name Charles or Pym. Then we have these people, the royalists and this supposed spy, and a solemn list. So he actually wrote this in a very serious tone, but it was actually a parody. So again, that satire idea. A serious tone to this letter, but it's meant to be taken as satire. But obviously I don't think it would have, because boom, the claim that was made here was that this dog was not actually just a dog. It was a woman, a handsome white woman that Rupert enjoyed pleasures with. Or how do they say it? Enjoyed frequent sexual encounters with. And okay, so they're implying that he had sex with his dog. Sometimes comedy goes a little too far. But well done, England. Well done, TV and Cleveland. Well done. I applaud you. You are very creative in your satire. Good job. So here, TV's ventriloquist was tipping his hat to the contemporary conviction that witches had sex with their familiars, and in the process, hinting very strongly that Rupert was himself a witch. There you go. So there's that joke. Kind of hard to understand because, again, witchcraft looks so different nowadays than it does back then. But this writer, TV, was sort of playing on that idea that it's been well known in the 1600s that witches slept with their familiars. Either their animal counterparts, their partners, their assistants. They would sleep. And so he made that joke in this parody account that was written in a serious tone. Yikes. Not surprisingly, the publication of the observations caused a considerable stir, and 3 separate editions of the pamphlet are known to have been printed. One of them featuring a woodcut engraving of Boy. Interesting. So this publication came out. One edition had a wooden, basically carving of the dog printed on this carving, basically. Crazy. By now, Rupert's dog had become front page news, and the animal went on to feature in a whole series of pamphlets, some of them even more scurrilous than the observations. That basically means the claim of sex between the dog and Rupert. It was not just the only scandalous claim they printed. There was more. Yikes. There can be little doubt that by mid-1643, Boy was the most celebrated familiar that England had ever seen. Celebrated in both ways. In a horrific, I'm scared of my life and I do not want to see this dog kind of way. And celebrated in the sense of, yeah, Rupert, get it, boy. That kind of jest, basically. Wow. So one publication, so it started off with the pamphlets being propaganda, right? Against Rupert. Look at him, his mystical, magical, evil being. He can't be harmed, he can't be shot. He must have done some magic to protect himself. Then led to Cleveland retaliating and talking about the dog. And how the dog also had these kind of magical powers that the pamphlets claimed. And it's supposed to be a joke, but the parliamentarians took it seriously. Then we have this TV writer who played again, like put a parody account on Cleveland's poem and added to this in an awful way, basically, about like the whole thing about witches having sex with their familiars, playing on that quite a bit. And now you've got the whole of England competing to add to the rumor mill, basically. But they basically worked very, very hard to make this dog look evil. But in the end, it actually made him infamous throughout the Civil War. It's so crazy. It started as a joke, and satire became a front page, widespread, celebrated piece of news. Oof, that's interesting. Throughout late 1643 and early 1644, Royalist writers continued to derive great amusement from the mock-serious claim. I love that word, by the way, mock-serious. That's exactly what satire is, mock-serious. Love that word. I want to use that forever. First, again, promulgated by Cleveland in his poem, and then elaborated by T.B. in his faux parliamentarian pamphlet. that the Roundheads regarded Boy with superstitious fear, but cavalier laughter soon turned to tears. In July 1644, Rupert and the king's northern army were decisively defeated at the Battle of Marston Moor. Thousands of royalists were killed, and among casualties was the prince's famous dog. No, Boy! That is so sad. So the royalists were having fun with this dog and the jokes and the jest and the satire. Then it ended up actually being sad because the dog actually passed away during this conflict. That is really sad. I never like reading about stories of dogs dying, and so despite this being a pretty funny, crazy history story, I'm really sorry to Rupert for having a companion like that pass away on him. That's never a good feeling. However, reactions weren't always tearful, as you can imagine. Parliamentarian polemicists seized on Boy's death with predictable glee. Royalist writers, for their part, never seemed to have mentioned Boy again. For them, the joke that the dog could assist his master in battle had turned distinctly sour. Makes sense, right? This dog became a figurehead in the Civil War, and then to hear of the passing would mean, oh no, did we take our jokes too far? Now we feel bad. There's that kind of guilt maybe that comes with a mock serious comedy. So, makes sense. Definitely makes sense. So despite the assertions of the royalist propagandists and of the many later scholars who have been deceived by their effusions, there is little evidence to suggest that the belief that Boy was a familiar spirit was genuinely widespread in the parliamentarian camp. Oh my god! So this one group of parliamentarians believed this, but of the entire side of that war, it was really just a small group of people, not the entire parliamentarian group. So the widespread rumors that the royalists played on, and the propagandists played on with all the satire, wasn't actually true. Oh no. So this crazy propaganda printing press war of the dog and the rumors really only got sparked by a small group of people versus an entire population. Oh, this poor dog. Oh man. Wow. Nevertheless, though, the repeated references to Boy in the ephemeral literature of the day clearly had the effect of raising the profile of familiars in general, while the repeated claims that Rupert possessed supernatural powers were undoubtedly believed by at least some of the ordinary people who encountered them. Interesting. So the dog, overall, the entire population of England, didn't really believe in this dog or this familiar per se, but they believe that if someone was a witch, they did have a familiar. So while they didn't believe this dog in particular was one, the belief of familiars kept being spread and to be feared about. But what's interesting about this is that Rupert, there's a wide group of people and some of the ordinary citizens that actually still believe that Rupert was a witch. It's kind of a convoluted, backwards kind of way of thinking if you think about it. Crazy. There's a little bit left here, so I'm going to just keep reading and I'll save the rest of these reactions till the end. I want to hear more about how Rupert's continues, or the story continues basically. The bizarre reports that were circulated about Rupert and his dog almost certainly helped to fuel the growing popular anxiety about witchcraft, which became evident during the 1640s. They may even have contributed to the Great English Witch Hunts of 1645 to 1647, when Matthew Hopkins, the so-called witch finder general, hunted down scores of alleged witches in parliamentarian East Anglia. At the height of this panic, it is intriguing to note James Moore, a Suffolk man suspected of witchcraft, testified to the fact that he and a relative had sent 3 imps or familiars to assist Prince Rupert several years before. What? Yikes. Wow. Okay. Carry on. Moore's testimony shows Moore's testimony shows how the stories about Rupert and Boy, originally invented for polemical purposes in Oxford and London, had filtered down to the villages of provincial England, where they had been incorporated, by some at least, into their occult worldview. Thus, partisan political propaganda had collided with popular witch belief to produce strange new fusions. So, this kind of made up rumor, this kind of made up situation and rumors led to potentially this entire panic and anxiety of witchcraft, that when you went to the smaller parts of England, or like outside of the big cities like London, Oxford, Manchester, all those big places, it actually trickled down into their belief system. Not only is it a rumor or it was used for propaganda, these smaller villagers and villages actually believed it to be true. So then that's what I mean by the new fusions, the new take on what was happening for witchcraft in England at this time. Wild. Okay. In 1646, the royalist cause collapsed and Rupert departed for the continent. After suffering many vicissitudes during the there's some big words on this article, I apologize here. After suffering many vicissitudes during the interregnum, he returned to England after the restoration of the monarchy and was eventually buried at Westminster Abbey in 1682. By this time, Boy had been all but forgotten, and it was only with the 19th and 20th century rediscovery of the satirical text, which the royalist polemicists had written about him, that the conviction that the Roundheads had been terrified of Prince Rupert's dog again took root. Crazy. So it looks like here in the war, like, things didn't go well for the royalists, and there was a period of time after the Civil War, I know this for a fact, that the parliamentarians tried to keep ruling England and be successful without a monarch, without any aristocracy. However, the monarchy obviously came back into play and had rule again in England, and that's why Prince Rupert came back as being part of this royal lineage, basically, and passed away and was buried at Westminster Abbey in 1682. But between, it looks like, 1644 and 1682, and even till about the 19th and 20th century, as they said, all was forgotten about this dog, until now we've discovered these prints and texts from these satirical writers of the royalist side in 1643 to 1644. Wow. It's crazy how some of these discoveries and written texts from hundreds of years ago resurfaces these rumors and this popularity and famous part to a war that had nothing really to do with the war, if you think about it. It was just a propaganda stunt that became a little too widespread, a little too well believed in this case. Wow. Alright, last little article here. Last part of the article here. How delighted John Cleveland would have been to know that the hare, or perhaps one should say the devil dog, which he had first set running in 1642 to 43, would still be subverting Roundhead reputations more than 350 years later. I love that. If we could speak to this John Cleveland today, and to hear that this dog and its reputation has resurfaced, he would probably be beside himself with pride, maybe laughing it off quite a bit, but that's hilarious that this dog has ruined this parliamentary reputation 350 years later. I love it so much. And there's some more little bits here for the article. It seems like oh, actually, this is actually really interesting. I'm going to go through it. I know this is going to be a little bit of a longer episode than I intended for this first one, but you're going to be interested in this. So, Poodle powers this next part of the article, a little mini section at the end here. And so, according to a contemporary pamphlet, so probably in the 19th century era, so 1800s, early 1900s, this is the these are the powers that they think Boy possessed back in the 1600s. So Boy possessed the following range of extraordinary occult powers: the power to prophecy or to predict the future, the power to find hidden treasure and all sorts of other concealed goods, the power to speak many languages, including Hebrew and High Dutch. Okay, I didn't realize speaking many different languages is a witchcraft occult thing, but maybe it is. Maybe being too intelligent is a sign of witchcraft, who knows? I have the power to render both himself and his master weapon-proof or invulnerable to bullets. So they believe this dog protected Rupert from being hurt and harmed. Alright. The power to make himself invisible. The power to assume the form of other people by shifting his shape. Okay, so maybe that's where they thought Rupert was a shapeshifter, is because of this belief. Another one here, the power to inflict death or injury on those who had wronged him, the dog itself. Alrighty. And then the last one here, the power to prevent others from taking rational decisions by making them impotent in their minds. So basically wiping their minds so they couldn't make a decision or decide what to do. Interesting. So that's what they believed this dog had. All the powers that this dog possessed. Quite interesting to see how these powers were perceived as witchcraft or devilish or satanic in the 1600s. Wow. People's imaginations, when they hear a rumor or hear something unique or weird or strange, and the way they run with it is so crazy. And I think this is a really good indication of how just the one little thing, that one little seed of thought that gets put in your head about something like this stays with you, and it ends up recreating and reposting these things over the years. Phenomenal. Very crazy. And lastly, this last little bit here, it's just a really cool part of this article, really cool section, is other known devil dogs. So Boy was the most celebrated familiar spirit of this day, but he was by no means the only imp to catch the popular imagination during the Tudor and early Stuart periods. Other famous familiars included Bomelius, the black dog who belonged to the Elizabethan sorcerer known as Feats. Tom. Oh, I'm so sorry if your name is Tom. I don't want you to be known as a devil dog, but apparently there's a devil dog named Tom, and he's the demon in the shape of a dog who was said to have appeared to a woman named Elizabeth Sawyer during the reign of James I and seduced her into servicing the devil. Tom was subsequently to be immortalized as Tomboy in Thomas Decker's stage playing The Witch of Edmonton. Oh, cool. Fun fact, I live in the city named Edmonton, so good to know that our city here maybe is run by a witch dog named Tom. Great. Solid. Again, this is in England though, so there is a section in London called Edmonton Green, or that's known as Edmonton, so it could be that part, but it's still funny to me that I live in a city called Edmonton and there's this witch of Edmonton that they're talking about. Lastly but not least, the other devil dog known in this historical period was Mammalian, the spirit in the shape of a brown-colored dog who supposedly lay with a Lancashire woman during the 1630s. Like Tom, Manilian was later to be resurrected in a play, this time Heywood and Bronze, the late Lancashire witches in 1634. Wow. So devil dogs have definitely been a part of history in England, and when it comes to witchcraft and familiars and this panic and anxiety around that, really became sparked by Prince Rupert and his dog, who may or may not have been this devil. It's up to you, for you to decide if you believe the rumors to be true for Prince Rupert and his dog. What a fascinating start to our unique history series. Leave a comment below. Do you think this dog was actually powerful or had some maybe he was like a luck charm to Rupert at the very least? Or were all these things that have been reported about the dog just fallacy? Just fake news, basically. Let me know what you think below, or even if you just have a general comment about Rupert and his dog Boy, let me know. I hope you enjoyed this first edition of Unique History, and I've got plenty more of these to come in the following weeks. I hope you enjoy this new series, and yes, I'm looking forward to sharing more with you, whether it be about a powerful murder-happy queen, to maybe even about a monk who's not really a monk, or even hermits that took the role of a hermit too seriously. You'll never know what I talk about until next week. Take care, everybody, and I can't wait to share the next chapter of Unique History with you soon. Bye bye.